Imagine you are a Londoner in 1955, taking a trip to the countryside. You think you're just visiting another part of Britain, but you've actually crossed into a foreign land. This place is governed by a dense network of unspoken rules that a city dweller would find baffling. Here, the way you speak, the flowers you plant, and the way you buy a pint are all public statements, loaded with meaning you cannot yet read. Your first test is immediate, and it begins at the garden gate. The garden is not your own. To a visitor from the city, a front garden is a private space, a small patch for personal hobbies. In the 1950s village, this assumption is your first mistake. The front garden was a semi-public stage, the space where a family's respectability and diligence were performed for the constant discerning gaze of the community. A tidy garden, with its manicured lawn and neat borders, was a clear signal of a well-ordered, respectable household. An unkempt one suggested something more than laziness. It hinted at moral and domestic laxity. This pressure was a recent development, born from newfound prosperity. The utilitarian dig-for-victory vegetable patches of the war years were disappearing. As rationing finally ended in 1954, the national mood shifted from subsistence to style. The new vogue was for colourful flowers and neatly trimmed shrubs, a transition from cabbage to rose that powerfully symbolized a return to a life beyond mere survival. This choice to dedicate precious land to non-essential beauty was a visible declaration of personal and national recovery. It signaled that a family had the time, resources, and optimism to cultivate something beautiful. The state of one's garden was subject to intense community scrutiny. A meticulously tended plot was a source of pride for the entire street, contributing to the collective presentation of the village. The social pressure to conform was immense. A casual comment from a neighbour, "Morning, nice weather for gardening, isn't it?" carried the unspoken weight of a moral duty. The standard was often set by retired couples, whose gardens looked as though they had been tended with nail scissors and a tooth comb. This public display was enclosed by a fence or hedge, a distinctively English feature that marked a clear boundary of domestic privacy, even as it served as a community billboard. A city visitor might see only a pleasant floral display. A fellow villager, however, would read a detailed narrative of the owner's economic status, their conformity to community standards, and their confidence in a brighter future. The pub is not just a bar. After navigating the garden, our city visitor might seek refuge in the local pub, assuming it's an anonymous place for a quiet drink. This is the second mistake. In the 1950s, the public house was the village's primary social institution, its secular church. It was the undisputed focus of community life, a neutral ground where social bonds were forged and news was exchanged. Inside, a club atmosphere welcomed regulars but could feel intimidating to strangers. This was a place to hear gossip, learn of cheap deals, and receive social support during hard times. Behavior was governed by a strict set of unwritten rules. Central to everything was the system of buying drinks in rounds, where each member of a group would take a turn to buy for everyone else. To refuse to participate, or to leave before buying your round, was considered deeply antisocial. The physical space was also coded. Sitting at the bar signalled an openness to conversation, while occupying a table implied a desire for the company of one's own group. The pub was a predominantly masculine space. The public bar was the domain of working men, while the more respectable saloon or lounge was where women might feel more comfortable. This was not the era of the gastropub. Food was a secondary concern. The now famous ploughman's lunch was not an ancient tradition, but a 1950s marketing invention by the Milk Marketing Board to boost lunchtime sales. The pub's importance is clearer when seen as a counterpoint to the era's domestic ideology, with post-war culture emphasizing the home and encouraging women to be an occupation housewife. The pub offered a crucial male-coded alternative. It was an escape from domestic drudgery and a venue for a different social performance based on camaraderie and banter. A city visitor might see a place to buy a beer. A villager would understand it as the primary arena for reinforcing male identity and community bonds. Knowing your place isn't an insult. A city dweller, accustomed to urban anonymity, would likely find the village class structure stifling. It was a highly stratified society where everyone had a defined place. Deference was the expected currency, flowing upwards from agricultural labourers to farmers, and from there to the gentry and the vicar. The social ladder was clear. The squire at the top, followed by the vicar, professionals, farmers, tradesmen, and finally agricultural labourers, many of whom lived in tied cottages owned by the farm where they worked, cementing their economic dependency. This system was policed through subtle cues. Middle-class insecurity about status often manifested in language. Sociological observations noted that the middle classes might use genteel words like perfume to appear more posh, whereas the established upper class felt secure enough to use the more direct language of the working class, such as scent. Behavior was similarly coded, with a culture of emotional restraint and politeness used to maintain social distance. Direct questions were often met with evasive answers, forcing one to listen loudly to interpret subtext. The post-war economic boom didn't dissolve this structure. It heightened the anxieties around it. With rising wages, the potential for social mobility, or at least its appearance, made the rules of class a more dynamic, high-stakes game. Adherence to these codes was a vital strategy for securing one's precarious position on the social ladder. A visitor from the city would likely fail to grasp the immense significance attached to these seemingly minor cues, mistaking a system of predictable social order for simple oppression. Gossip is the village internet. Horrified by the lack of privacy, our urban visitor would soon discover that in a village where family histories went back generations, knowing everyone's business was the default state. Gossip was not a trivial pastime. It was the village's unwritten system of social regulation and information dissemination. Information was the currency of social life, and it flowed through a well-established network of nodes. The local bus was a prime opportunity for a good gossip and catch-up. The pub was a central clearinghouse for news and rumour. The village post office, often one of the few places with a telephone, functioned as a communications exchange. An observant postmistress might know not to ring a house because the occupants had gone up the village, demonstrating a real-time knowledge of her neighbours' movements. This network, which could spread news like wildfire, was the primary mechanism for policing social norms and reinforcing shared values. It was also a key source of entertainment, especially for young people with few commercial leisure options. But the system had a darker side. It could be weaponized through rumors and falsehoods, amplified by curtain twitchers, who might even trespass to eavesdrop on their neighbours. The inability to escape this constant scrutiny was a significant drawback of village life. In a community with limited formal policing, gossip functioned as a system of informal governance. It collectively enforced a moral code without resorting to formal authority. A city dweller, accustomed to the shield of anonymity, would see this as intolerably intrusive. A villager, however, understood it as a fundamental part of the social contract. One submits to being known and judged in exchange for the security and sense of belonging that the group provides. Never ever show off. As the decade progressed and prosperity grew, a new challenge emerged. The city dweller, finally earning a good wage, might proudly purchase a new television or a family car. In the village, this was a dangerous move. Displaying new wealth was important, but doing so too overtly risked the grave accusation of getting above your station. The engine of this change was a dramatic rise in real incomes and the widespread availability of credit after government controls were relaxed in 1954. This fueled a boom in consumer spending. The ultimate status symbol was the television. In 1950, only 1% of households had one, but the 1953 coronation of Queen Elizabeth II was a massive catalyst for adoption, with millions crowding into the homes of the lucky few who owned a set. Other desirable goods included washing machines, refrigerators, and cars, with ownership of the latter soaring by 250% between 1951 and 1961. This new consumerism fostered a competitive spirit of keeping up with the Joneses, but it was held in check by a powerful cultural aversion to ostentation. The arrival of the television was a particularly transformative event, a Trojan horse of social change. The village had been a relatively closed information ecosystem, its norms reinforced internally. The television breached this system, piping the outside world, with its urban lifestyles and American rock and roll, directly into the home. Owning a TV was a powerful statement of a family's success. At the same time, its content began to erode the very insularity that defined village life, leading to moral panics like the rock and roll riots of 1955. A city person would see a simple appliance. A villager would experience it as a complex symbol of personal progress that was also a potential threat to the established social order. The Women's Institute is the real village council. A visitor from the city might easily dismiss the Women's Institute with the stereotype of jam and Jerusalem. This would be the final and perhaps greatest mistake. While men conducted their social lives in the pub, the WI functioned as the organizational and moral backbone of the village. It was a formidable institution that channeled the collective energy of rural women into community improvement and the upholding of civic standards. Its official purpose was to improve and develop conditions of rural life. strictly non-political and non-sectarian, it built a broad base of support across class lines. The WWI was a powerhouse of practical action. At a national level, members raised huge sums for campaigns like Freedom from Hunger. Locally, they were tireless campaigners on issues from the need for more rented housing to concerns about pollution. They established village halls and organized countless community events. Education was a core mission, with the WI offering courses on citizenship, crafts and home economics, and even opening its own residential college, Denman, in 1948. In a society where women were largely excluded from formal positions of power and encouraged back into the domestic sphere, the WI provided a legitimate and highly effective alternative power structure. Through persistent campaigning and organizing, the WI identified local needs and mobilized its members to address them, often more efficiently than official authorities. An outsider might see a quaint social club. A villager, however, would understand that if you wanted to get a project off the ground, you ignored the WI at your peril. They were the village's unofficial and most effective Ministry of Public Works, Health and Education. Our visitor from the city would likely flee, bewildered by the lack of privacy, the constant scrutiny, and the baffling social codes. They would mistake public friendliness for an invitation into a private sphere and be confused by the subsequent polite rebuff. They would fail to grasp the paternalistic authority of the vicar and squire or the immense significance of a well-tended garden. The great irony is that these very codes, so strange to an urban mindset, were the threads that wove the community together. The unwritten rules were the intricate social technology that managed the constant friction between the community's demand for conformity and the individual's desire for private autonomy. They created a powerful, if sometimes suffocating, sense of belonging and mutual obligation. We have since traded that world for one of greater personal freedom and privacy. But looking back, it is hard not to feel a sense of loss for that deep, unspoken, and perhaps irreplaceable sense of being truly known. So, which of these unwritten rules feels the most familiar, or perhaps the most surprising? Let me know in the comments below. And for more journeys into Britain's past, don't forget to subscribe to the channel.